Hello, this is Pane Consulting ArcGIS Workshop. I'm Frank Conkling, and today this workshop is about editing attributes in ArcGIS Pro. This may not be one of the fanciest or sexiest topics, but I think everyone can learn something because ESRI is constantly going and introducing little bitty tips and tricks inside of here, and hopefully I'm going to show you some of them today. So to begin, let's sort of look at the topics that we're planning on going over. We're going to start with attribute tables and panes, just sort of the standard interface getting into ArcGIS Pro and editing these attributes. We'll look at tabular data, how it actually works, and what we're looking at, and how we can configure those fields and how that configuration has an impact on us. Things like setting default values to help us do the edits, and then making bulk and individual edits on here. Then we're going to get into some more of designs, things like domains and subtypes in here, coded value domains and subtypes. And if we have time, we'll start looking at attribute rules. And in addition to that, we'll look at transfer attributes and sequential numbering, some of the new tools inside of ArcGIS Pro that are very helpful if you're doing a lot of attribute editing. So let's begin. All right. All right. So in ArcGIS Pro, there's two main interfaces that we use to go and interact with the attribute tables. Now remember, inside of GIS, for the most part, we think of our records, we think of our features as being two discrete things. One is the geometry of those features, and the other being the attributes of them. And they're presented to us as just sort of a table of columns or fields and rows or features in what we're doing. So that these are the columns and these are the features. These are the individual geometries as we go through here. And when we interact with them, there's a couple of different ways that we can go and select things and edit things in here. Today, we're going to be dealing primarily with that interaction and editing on here. So let's go and just actually look at an attribute table. So if we go and open up our attribute table, we can right click on that feature class, that layer, and go to my attribute table and open that up. Now, what that will do is it will expose to me, as I've got it configured, all of these individual feature classes in here, all of the rows and the columns that I have configured. And depending upon how I've got them set up, might have some of them highlighted, so my eyes are drawn to those. And some of them might be configured elsewhere. Some of them may even be hidden in here. But this is sort of the way that it's presented to us. And it's given to us in that there's multiple things we can do with it. We can go all the way over on the left side, and if this is specifically the one we're looking for, we can select it here. We can hold down our Shift key and select it here. There's multiple ways that we can select things. We can also interactively select things by going and drawing a box here with our selection tool. And that selection tool will select everything that we inside that box that we drew that is selectable. In this case, it drew it found points, it found lines, and it found polygons in here. Oh, I'm only interested in polygons. So let's look at the first thing we can do in here. With this, there's a way that it shows us what we've got selected. And I can right click on that layer name and I can say, only select these things on here. It's a little bit better than the way ArcMap used to do it. Now we used to have to unselect, unselect, unselect. Now we can just say, just select these things in here, and it will show us these components on here. And if we're at that top level of that, it will go and show that there's multiple things, how many things we have selected, and whether or not there's any common values through here or whether there's different values. So again, with our collection here, I can see that, oh, this collection, I have three different features selected, three different polygons selected. And if I go down here, They have different numbers. They have common of good parcel. This is one of the attributes in here. Those are common. And then things like also what values for the last edit, the map acres, the stated acres, calculated acres, those are all different. And then the geoid, which is our census block, is actually all in the same census block because this is the same area. But so it tells us whether or not they're all the same or whether they're not the same. And then when we go and click on any one of these, it will show us the information for that specific parcel. So in this case, I can now see here's what the parcel number is, and here's a reconfiguration and another reconfiguration of those. Here's the last edit date and such. So these are all set up as far as my configurations. And I know you can't see this because this is very nuanced. You can see it a little bit better in a dark appearance, but this is very nuanced. But this numbers that are in this parcel number is a little bit darker than the numbers that are in parcel ID. And that's because the numbers that are in this field and this field are read only. All right, so that's one of the things that's set up on here is I've got it set up so that there's read only in here. Matter of fact, if I move my cursor over those fields, all right, it will show me on there what the name of the field is, what the type of field it is, whether it's a string or a number or whatever, whether or not there's a default value in here, all right, and whether or not that is nullable. Nullable means can that field be empty? And in this case, this is set up where it can be nullable. And then whether or not it has a calculation attribute rule against it. Calculation attribute rule, we're going to look at a little bit later, is things and ways in which we can automatically calculate elements in here. All right. So that's the first thing there is how do we look at these and how do we explore them? We could do similar here over on the attribute table in that I have a selection and on the table, it tells me that I have 3 selected. And this is over on the bottom, this is show me all the records. Or if I click here, show me just the selected records. So it's another interface into looking at this same collection of selected elements on here. Again, the attribute table sometimes has an advantage in that you can see all the values in there. You don't necessarily get any sort of comparison as whether there's one that's unique through there or not. But it does show you all of those values in here. So the next thing I want to look at is, okay, if I've got all of these values in here and I select this, what can I do with this? How can I change these? In this case, I can actually go and change elements in here. Now, so for example, if I take and change a value, let's change a value in the last edit date. All right, this is a date field. And if I go here, it'll show me that this is in fact a date field, whether or not it's a high precision or whether it's nullable. And I can either type in the date or I can go and click on the calendar and have it input that way. Oftentimes, if I'm doing a lot of editing, I find a calendar interface, it's fine when you're starting out, but after that, it just sort of gets a little bit cumbersome. And I can go and just go and type in fact, 08/20/2025 and do it that way. Now, one thing you'll notice is that I typed in just the date, but it actually also included the time on here and included a default time on here. So it depends upon, again, that's configuration of this data. We'll get to that. We'll get to that fairly quickly. Also, there's map acres here, there's stated acres here. Well, this is a parcel fabric, and the map acres is a user-defined field, and the stated acre is a system-defined field. This is set up so that the system can automatically calculate it. Same way with shape area is a system field and created by, retired by, those are all system fields. But the map acres, in fact, is one that's a user-defined field. This is one that I created for this feature class. Going down a little bit further, there's a couple other things we want to look at. There's one here called is a seed. What is that? Why is that set up that way? Well, it turns out that that purple field is in fact the way that this feature class is actually symbolized. And it's symbolized telling me whether or not this is a seed or not. In this case, it's not a seed here. And a seed in a parcel fabric is a preliminary parcel that's getting ready to get built. Unless you're dealing with the parcel fabric, you won't see that. But if in fact you have a field which is listed in purple, that's because that's the way that that feature class is symbolized on there. All right. So let's move through here a little bit more. So if I want to go and change one of these fields, the options that are available to us are dependent upon what type of field it is, whether or not there's any other interactions on there. So for example, the parcel type field, if I look at it, it actually has no calculation attribute field on it, but it does have a coded value domain on it. So if I click on it, it gives me a list of here's the types of parcels that can be coded on this. Makes it very easy to pick from that list, but it also means that you have to have something from that list. You can't just put a random value in there. And that's something that's set up when you're setting up the feature class for editing and display on here. It's a good idea if you know what your values are going to be beforehand. If you don't know what the values are, there's other options in here. But if you know the values, I strongly recommend you put in here coded value domains, and we'll look at that a little bit more. All right. Some other things, and these are the things that I actually just found out as I was going through here. So it turns out that Esri has slipped into here the ability to do something that in ArcMap, we had a button for, but in ArcGIS Pro, we really didn't have a button for. And that is I can look here and I can right click on my column and I can set this value to null. So I can automatically, I don't have to go and edit over there and do it. I can null it out that way. But more importantly, I can tell it to go and read my database and get all of the unique values in here, which it just did. So now when I go in here, I can look, this is actually now a pull down. And that pull down gives me every single unique value in my database for those numbers. So real quickly, if I'm looking and I don't know what the other values are that's stored in here, and by the way, this has got something like 40,000 values in here. This gives me a quick way to see, do I have this anywhere else inside of this database that I want to go and find? That is, in fact, just this right click on here and say get unique values. Once I've got them, I can even right click over here and it'll give me the list of all those unique values. All right, so there's a couple of ways to make it easier to edit without you having to type all the time. One, get unique values. The other one is set up coded value domains in there to go and edit these things. So here's a couple other things that are interesting in here. So I have this selection and I can individually go down here to every one of these and input a value in here. I can input the date of edit or not on all of these. But if I have a selection, I can click on the layer. And again, remember the layer is going to give me whether or not it's the same value in all my collection or whether there's different values for each of these fields going through. And I can, for example, let's go into the last edit and I can say, okay, well, maybe that's all the same value. All right. When I do that now, I can look at each of these have now been updated with that value on them. So that's one of the things I can do. Another thing, it gives me reminds me to go and note this. Another thing that Pro has done just recently has given us this auto apply option down on the bottom so that when I make a change, it automatically is committing it to the database. It's not saving it, but it's committing it and it's reflecting what that change is. If I turn that off, now when I make a change in here, for example, maybe I change this back to 0731 2025, it doesn't necessarily commit that. It doesn't write it until I actually tell it to apply that. All right, so now if I were to go back here and do it here, I would see that this would still be 820. I did apply it, didn't I? Yeah. Anyway, so again, with this in here, let's go and change this on here. And until I do that, it's not going to apply it. It's going to keep it, but because I marked it off there, it went and put it automatically. So couple of things in there. You just want to, these are the easiest ways to go and interact with your parcels. Only select these. And for example, if I wanted to, I could go in here and say, well, that's the one. I don't want that one. I can unselect that. I can only select that. I could delete that. So it gives me a way to go and automatically edit and interact with these components in here. By far, the attribute pane, which is the vertical one, this is the one that has the main interface for editing, is the a very easy way to get into editing all of these. Well, a couple other tricks before I move on from here. If I go back to the table actually has a very interesting element in here. Remember when I went over here and I said, okay, so show me all of the unique values in here. And then I went in here and it's like, oh, okay. Remember I said there were 40,000 parcels in here? So I have lots of unique values. So what happened if I wanted to find one unique value? I have a couple selections, ways I can do this. I can go over to the table and I can do a select by attribute. And then I can go in here and I can say, I want to select from this field where it's equal to this, and I can have it list all of those values in here, or I can type in just some elements on there. For example, I can tell it, I just want it to contain the following text and say, okay, it's 34-25-01W. All right, and tell it to go in and search for all of those, and it will go and search all of those in there and give me a selection set. And in this case, it told me the selection set was 0. So it got rid of all the selections. Let's go back here and just select these things on here and only select this. So that's one way to select things, but there's a better way. There's a faster way of doing it, I found, in that if I go over to the options on the attribute table, this is called, often it's referred to as the hamburger. This is actually the option area. And if I click on the option, it shows me I can go to a find and replace. Now, the find and replace is basically a two-step process. The first one is, okay, first, if I'm editing, it's find and replace. If I'm not editing, it's just find. It only gives me the find option. Then the second thing is I have to tell it what field I want to go and find this in. And note, as I change the field here, it's changing here where it's going to look, because this is only looking in one field. It's not looking through all of them, but it's only looking in one field. And then I tell it what strings or what elements I want to find in here. O1 East, and I hit go ahead and find this, and this will find it, whether or not it's in there. Well, it turns out that there's some things going on in the background here with the real values in here. That's why you're seeing no results in here. And that's part of the way this database is configured. Now, if I were to go and tell it here, let's go and find 292501. Ah, perhaps I need to go and do this on here and find this in here. Nope, won't find it in there. So there's still some elements in here. So there's some strange things going on because of the way I've configured my data. And we'll look at that shortly. But this is the find and replace tool. And this actually is a really nice tool. Um, let's say we just wanted to go in and look at where this is good parcel. This is a coded value domain. I don't even know if this is going to work. Nope, no results. Nope, there's three things selected. The find, by the way, is very unique in that it doesn't necessarily select them. It just goes and locates those elements in here. All right. We talked about editing these things by going in here and changing a value in here. Um, there's a couple ways of doing that. One, you can interactively do it inside the attribute pane. The attribute pane is interesting in that it allows you to do it um, on your selection or on all records in there. Same way with the geoprocessing tool to go and do a calculate field. This goes and refers to both the current selection that we have, right? It's popping up. While we're looking at this, let's also go and mention something. One of the interesting things about Pro, and one of the things I hear all the time is that, Pro seems to take longer than Map when I'm doing certain things. And that's true, but there's a reason for it. With Map, with ArcMap, they would let you go and build a query, and they had no idea whether or not it was valid, whether or not you were even choosing the correct feature classes or anything in there. It would let you build a query because it never did any validation beforehand. However, with ArcGIS Pro, when you go to create some, it actually pre-reads all of this for you. Then you get, and you can tell very specifically, oh, here's my information. Here's my fields in here. Here's all of this. And you get all of this information beforehand. So in fact, it is telling you whether or not there's elements in there, whether there's things that match up. There's a lot of information because it's preloading all of this for you. Second thing, it's telling you whether or not there's any selected features because the calculate field works either on selected features or your entire data set. So you have that option and it shows you whether or not you've got all of them selected. Now inside, when you're working with the calculate field geoprocessing tool, which is what I'm using here, the newer version 3.5 and 3.5.2 allows you to pop that up and it doesn't automatically tell you how many are in there, but it actually has an option where it says, oh, show me the count of what I have selected on there. And if I have anything selected, so you can know how many this is actually going to go and interact with on there. The other thing about the calculate field tool is you have options as far as what expression language you want to use. By default, it actually will default to Python on here. But you also can use Arcade scripting language. And it's preloading the Arcade element in here. You can also go and look at SQL expression or VB scripting if you're still making that change over from ArcMap. So on here, it will give me all my fields in here. It'll give me all of the helpers that are available for Arcade or for Python or for VB scripting. It allows you to go all that and what functions you have available. It also allows you to go and delete any existing expressions in here, check and validate your expressions by far. Please make sure you do this all the time. It will allow you to go and import an expression that's saved, or it will allow you to go and save an expression once you've got it, once you've got one written that you want to use over and over and over again. And then you hit run. Now, this tool, again, this will work against whether it's in your map, whether it's got anything selected, whether you have editing turned on or not turned on. The geoprocessing tool will work on all of it. However, the calculate tool in the attribute, while it looks very similar, it only will work when you're editing. But there's another thing that Esri has put in here, which I really like. This is whether or not you want to go and save, whether you want to apply this calculation on your edited tools, on your selected tools. This is your pending edits. You can undo them, you can save them, or you can delete those edits if, in fact, you're in the middle of something and you say, I really didn't want to do that. But so let me go and just undo all of those other edits that I did and say, okay, now let's go and do this calculation for me. Again, there's the same sort of options in here. You can look at some recent calculations if you might have done any. In here, I was calculating the acreage of a parcel in one of them. On here, I was also calculating a recent Python calculation in which I was going and setting a value, coded value domain on here. If I go to Arcade, let's see if I had any recent ones. So it's reading them and saying, oh, did I have any recent ones? I did have some recent Arcade expressions that I was using. This was the acreage calculation in Arcade. This is a replacement calculation I had. So if you're just learning these languages, you can use them to go back to things that you just recently used. Again, there's a lot of really nice little interface elements that have been built into this. All right, let's see where I'm at as far as the slides on here. So again, here's the attribute table, the attribute pane that you interact with while you're editing these elements. Calculations, these can happen with the geoprocessing or the calculate field in here, or you can interactively do it one by one, or everything is in your selection by doing it on the pane itself. Again, you just want to recognize that geoprocessing can work with or without you having something you're editing turned on. Find and replace. This is a really nice tool. I like this a lot and use it a lot if you're looking to go and find things, and you can replace those values in there, and it will replace either just the one or replace multiple ones. I can see from here that when I took this screenshot, editing was not turned on. This is just a find on here. Quick tip. If you don't particularly care for the locate tool that's in ArcGIS Pro now, you can do a find against the attributes on here pretty quickly and do that same thing. And then while you have your attribute tables open, you can just double click on that and it will go and do a zoom over to it. Another quick tip that's built into this. Another thing is on the interface, if I have something selected down here on the bottom of my drawing, the lower right corner of my drawing area, it will show me whether I have something selected. And let's select something else here. Let's select these things, and I can go and actually zoom to that selected here, or I can clear the selection here by these two interface elements in here, and it will zoom to everything here. I can clear it out. Again, I can select something here and then zoom to it. So there's a lot of elements in here as far as zooming and finding and selecting things on here. All right, find and replace. Again, this is a really nice interface. Again, it allows you to go and replace values that are not valid anymore. So the attribute pane, some key points. It doesn't necessarily require an edit session to get in and interact with these. It is based upon the feature selections, whether or not you have something selected, and you can view and edit related features. I haven't showed you that, but I'm going to do that here in a minute. And you can use auto apply down at the bottom to automatically apply these things. And there's automatic, what's called constraint behavior. Constraint behavior are things like read only, coded value domains. We're going to get into them in a minute. Let me just show you that thing about related features. All right, let's go back here. Let's go to our attributes. Let's select a couple features again. Let's go and just select our polygons in here. Remember I told you in the beginning that this is a parcel fabric, which means that there's a relationship class. And all of these parcels are related to they're related to a polygon feature class called records. And if I look here on my listing in my pane, it shows me that there's a what's called an exposure triangle. And if I click on that exposure triangle, I actually can see here's the record that this is related to. This is a polygon showing the graphic extent that created this on here. And when I click on that, I actually can see that here's the attributes of that. And I can get it here and I can actually edit the attributes of related records from the attribute pane. So let's just input in here that this is the selected record in here. If I go to another record, I could go and look at that, and here's that one here. So again, there's a lot of things that you can do just on that little pane. So many little tricks here and there. And that's, again, very, very powerful once you learn how to use these elements in here. Another thing I never really showed you was if I go here, and this is one of my favorites, if I have a value here, let's say I have this edit value, and this value, I want to go and copy and I want to paste that. There's multiple levels of cut, copy, and paste on here. So I can go in here and I can say, copy this value and take and over here, I can write here and I can say, here on this one, go and paste the value here. And I can copy and paste between records on here. Now, at the same time, I could go and go to my layer level. So I can copy it between here. I can also take a value in here and I can go to my layer here and I can tell it to paste that at this layer. I've already done that here. That's why it's on here. And I can say right click and I can, excuse me, I can go and I can say copy and paste it there. I can paste those. Or I could take the attributes of this entire parcel and say copy the attributes and go to a different one and say paste those attributes. So if you were watching, it actually copied and pasted everything in here, on here, for that. So I also have apply not turned on automatically. So let's go and auto apply this. So you can see that those are completely applied now. The attribute pane has so many depths of ways that you can copy and paste things between there, ways that you can edit in there, that for the most part, I find I use that more than I use even calculate fields, more than I use the attribute table on here. But again, it's good to know both of these just because there are options in here. So again, some of the neatest ones, this whole thing, get unique values, and then allows you to go in here and show you every unique value. That's a new one that just got put in here. A coded value domain is in here. The ability to go and select how these things are displayed. For example, right now I'm displaying my acreage with 2 decimal places and AC at the end of it. Whereas if I look down here, my shape area is square footage, but it's 0.23. The shape length, this is the actual perimeter of the shape, but I don't know what that is. So let's talk about going and configuring those so we can actually make them make more sense to us. And this is called the field designer. And in the field designer, this is where you actually go and tell it, do I want this field to be, let's go in here and do this. Go in here, let's go here. And if I right click on this and go to data design fields, it will allow me to go and pop up and say, okay, here, first column here is this field visible? And I can make something visible and invisible by checking this. And then is it read only or not? Well, if I'm looking, I actually have a column in which I'm listing my parcels 3 different ways. Only the first one is actually re-editable. The other two are read only because they get calculated. And then things like this parcel type, that's the one over here that says what type of parcel is this? And this is the one with the coded value domain on it. Well, here you can see that this parcel type actually is a number field, but it has a domain on it. And this domain actually has a list of the possible values that I can go and use on here. And I can actually go and list in here and edit that coded value domain to add a new number to it if I want. So if I wanted to create a list of domains on here, let's see if I can create one. These values are all pretty simple. I can go and create one. If I had a field here, I could go in and do that and tell it. And this is one of the nice things I like about this is that I can now, if I'm trying to create a coded value domain, it now allows me to open and create a completely empty one. Or I can tell it to create a domain from the existing field values that I have in there. So if I have already a field that's populated and I just want to get all of those unique values and make them a coded value domain, I can do that and tell it just create a new coded value domain with my existing values in here, and then let me start cleaning this thing up. Range domains are numbers that have to appear between certain value, an upper and a lower value in here. A range domain from the existing field values, I can do an attribute rule type or whatever. Let's just leave it at this and let's go on. So going across again, here is my highlight field. The highlight field is the one, let's change that. The highlight field is the one that, turn them all highlighted. The highlight field is the one that whether or not it's going to show as being yellow or not. All right. A yellow highlight goes and pulls the eye to it from when you're looking at designing your database, designing your feature class, recognize that if you make something yellow, automatically the editor will look at that thing. So it's always a good idea to look at and identify those elements that the user has to find and not pay attention to these, but pay attention to these things here and make them highlighted on there. And then the number format, that's part of when you add a field there, whether or not it's got a domain on here and whether you've got a default value in here. So in this case, I could tell it that I don't want a value or whether I want this always to be this one specific value. Or if it's just a number, I might be able to go and say, well, let's make this a default value. All right. Well, I've got existing things in here changed. I can't do that, but I could tell it to automatically add a default value inside, not the object ID here. I can make this with a default value of this so that as I create these, it will automatically fill that value in. So if you have one value that you constantly do, for example, a county number, automatically populate that. Tell it to go, that's the default value, unless you want to go and change it. And if you're going to do that, give them a list of options of where you possibly could go and do this, what other things you can do. Other elements you want to do, for example, the map acres. On here, if I go and click on this number field, this is the map acre field, and click on it, it tells me, all right, I want this to be a numeric field, 2 decimal places, and I want it to show my thousand separators and my zeros, and I want it to have a suffix in there of acreage. And when I do this, it automatically over here will automatically show me what that is. If I look at my date field here, I also can tell it what format of date I want to show. So maybe I don't want to show the actual time it was created. Maybe I just want to go and show it of like this. And that's the reason why when I first started, it showed you the time. And when I was editing, it showed you the time, and that was the default to midnight. And then I could, when it displayed it, it only displayed it that way. So setting up those configurations is done in a field designer on here. This is where you set up whether or not it's read only, whether or not it's highlighted, whether or not there's a coded value domain of some sort in there. Contingent values, these are the ways that you can tell it that if it's this, these are the options. These are contingent upon being this or this or this. The contingent values were introduced a couple of years ago. They really replace most of the functionality of the old subtypes. Subtypes are still good when you want to differentiate for topology purposes, but we're moving away from using those and getting more into contingent values if you're looking to populate the actual values in here. And then adding things like the default values inside these. So let's get into attribute rules. This is one I hear a lot of people asking me questions about. There's three types of attribute rules in here. There's a calculation attribute rule, a constraint attribute rule, and a validation rule. What do they do? Well, the calculation rule goes and automatically calculates something as soon as something else happens, and that's called a trigger. So here's the calculation rule. Here's what it's going to do. And then here's when it's going to trigger against there. And the triggers are insert, modify, or delete. So I can tell it when you insert something, do this rule. When you modify something, do the rule again. Or when you delete something, do another rule. The modify one is very interesting because in the newer versions of the software, it tells you, it allows you to go and specify what field gets modified before this rule actually goes and fires off and triggers on here. This is a great change, especially with large geodatabases. Interesting thing about attribute rules is they are stored in the geodatabase. They are not stored in your project file so that they go along with the geodatabase. When you give somebody else your geodatabase, they also get the rules that are part of it. So let's look at some rules. Let's look at this right here. Let's get rid of this. I don't want to change any of these in here, but I want to look at my attribute rules. So I'll go to my data designer, attribute rules in here, and a very simple one. Here's a calculate the acreage, and it's going to calculate the acreage. I tell it what the field is that it's going to calculate, and then what the expression is in Arcade, because this uses Arcade expression language. And it's going to calculate the area of that feature in acres. And then it's going to fire off every time you create one or every time you modify one, it's going to update that acres in here. And things like the calculate the parcel number field. Well, it turns out that the parcel number field, and let me open this up so you can see this a little bit better. The parcel no field actually has no dashes in it. So what we're going to do is, let's go from the inside out. We're going to take the information that's stored in the name field, and then we're going to replace the dashes with nothing. We're going to remove the dashes, and then we're going to trim it up. A trim basically says remove any spaces before or after this on here. And then when I go and do that, it's going to remove any dashes in the middle, and it's going to remove spaces before and after, because sometimes some of us have fat fingers, and sometimes we'll hit the space bar when we shouldn't hit. And this makes sure that this information is put in there correctly as we go forward. And again, that's made to go and do that on every time we do this, we create one or when we update it. Well, the reality is that this update, that should really only work when we update the name field. None of the other fields in here, so we can take these off, all right? And in this case, we have to go and deactivate this. We can select these all and deactivate them, and then let's put in here the name field. All right, goes back in here. As soon as we update the name field, that's going to go and do the tricks in here. The same way with the calculate, that really only happens when we calculate the name field. All right. Calculate the census information. All right. This is actually an intersection or a feature set rule. And what it actually does, and it's a little bit beyond the scope of this, is actually going to go and intersect a census layer that we have. And it's going to automatically store the census block group information inside this attribute field here called geoid 20. It automatically goes and populates the census block in which this is located. And that's what this arcade script does. And it goes and does that every time we update it, or every time we insert it, or every time we update it. Same way with a calc on here. To unique ID which is being used. I just have a question here. Are you using an attribute rule to create the unique ID which is being used to populate the parcel ID and the parcel no field? No, in this county, in this client, in fact, we are not. However, we do that in several other clients. The key to going and creating a unique ID is to actually have a set of business rules. You can't just say create a random number. You need to understand what the logic is for that. And if you can have them explain the logic, you can create it inside of an attribute rule, which goes and automatically creates the next sequential number for them, depending upon what those rules are. Trim name here. So these are calculation rules. These are rules that go and populate these attribute fields as you're going along. These are great rules, used a lot. And this is sort of the old attribute assistant in ArcMap, but on steroids. This is really powerful in what it can do. But there's another set of rules here, so that if we open this up and go to attribute rules, there's one called constraint rules. Now, these are really interesting rules in that these rules go and they stop you from doing things. The other ones just allow you to keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. The ones also don't even check to see whether or not the values in there meet what's required. But the attribute rules only work when you're creating or editing things. They have the same triggers or deleting, but what they do is they stop you from doing things. And this one is kind of unique. I have where this rule says you have to fill in the parcel number field. You have to fill something in there. And if it doesn't, it goes and throws off an error. So in this case, again, this is some attribute. This is arcade scripting. It just says if the name field is equal to null. If it's null, if it's got nothing in it, then return false, that you haven't complied with this rule. Otherwise, if there's something in it, return true, you've complied with, you go on. The constraint rules are unique in that when you create that rule, you also have to create an error warning, and that you have to give it a number. So it's a unique number, and then you have to tell it what this message is. In this case, I say, you must fill in the name field on here. And the way this works is kind of interesting in that if I go in here, let's go in back here to my parcels. I am editing, and let's clear my selection, and let's go and create a new parcel. All right. Now, when I create a parcel, a lot of the other things are going to fire off. But if I look here, what's going to happen if I look at the attributes, it says, wait a minute, you violated one of the rules. You violated the constraint rule. All right. And the rule is you have to fill in the parcel number. All right. And in here, it says you must fill in the name field. Now, personally, I wish there was a way to go and set this up so that it was a little bit easier to read that error message, but it's sufficient that it does that. So it has stopped me from proceeding or saving this because it's telling me there's a constraint rule violation in here. And the constraint rule just says, you got to have something in that parcel number on here. So, and I can put anything in there. And once I put something in there, it no longer is in violation. It just requires that before you proceed, you have to put something in there. All right. Um, we've experimented back and forth with constraint rules. Some clients like them, are willing to be constrained by them. Others hate them. It's like it stops you from doing things, so that they immediately say, "No, take it out. Take it out. We don't want that thing in here." The interesting is that if you're if you don't want the constraint rule, another way to do that is through what's called a validation rule. A validation rule says you can have a rule here that says you have to have a value in the number field, but it doesn't stop you from doing any work. But the only way to check this rule is you have to go and do what's called the error validation, which is similar to the old topology rules on here. So there's good ways and bad ways to enforce that your attributes comply with the business rules. Um, and there's different ways to do it. Again, in GIS, there's no one way to do everything, but there are multiple ways to go about this and to solve this. There's a calculation rule. This is a constraint rule, and the constraint rules you set up sort of the conditions, and then tell whether or not it complies with the conditions. It does comply with the condition, or it does not comply with the condition, and then the rule gets fired off and put up there in the mappers interface. And the validation rule, again, is similar to the topology in that it's not run at any of these. Matter of fact, you can see there's no triggers here. It just goes at the end and says, okay, let's check these validation rules and see if you're in compliance with them. And that's the same. Yes. Oh, all right. Um, if you have a question, go ahead and put it over in the comment in the chat window, or hold off until we're done with the recording. Okay. Field mapping. This one is really interesting. This is another thing that has to do with the attribution in here, and that it's very unique inside of a Pro. In ArcMap, you used to be able to copy and paste things in, and when you paste it, ArcMap kind of tried to do field mapping if you were taking things between different layers and trying to make them to fit. In ArcGIS Pro, you actually have to do some manual field mapping to make sure, because there's no way to go and really tell which of these are actually going to work and which of them won't. So to do the field mapping, there's a couple ways you can get to it. This is the easiest way. This is the way I found. On the bottom of the editing component on here, there's a little click and it pops up more options in here. And in here is things like snapping and grid and constraints and whether or not you're showing vertices, but field mapping. In here, this is where you set whether or not these fields are the same, whether or not they're going to be in compliance. In this case, I have a couple polygons, and this is where I wish they would change this interface. Right now, this says this is the target that you're sending these attributes to, and this is the source where you're pulling it from. I instinctively, maybe my brain is backwards, my brain says, go from here to there. And this one says, go from here to there. So you just want to be careful with that. It's caught me a couple times when I do this. So in this case, I'm going to go from my lot polygons into my parcel polygons, and it will automatically, once I've done that, it will automatically see whether I've got similar components in there. And if I don't, it gives me the option to go, well, here's the same type of fields in the source that might match that. Unfortunately, there's, well, okay, well, maybe the stated area, in fact, there is stated area will move into here because I have an attribute rule for that, so I can do that. The rest of these I don't. But field mapping, if you want to go and copy and paste things between feature classes, this is the way you do it. You first set up your field mapping, and then once you set the field mapping up, then you can go and use the attribute transfer tool here under attributes. Here, the attribute transfer tool, and you can click, let's turn on our lot layers in here. And in here, I can go and say, let's transfer this according to my field mapping. And I can, let's make sure my lot polygons are selectable. Yeah. And I can go and transfer from here. All right. And by the way, this is the new thing. This is the chip which says you've gone and selected two different things. Which do you want? And I'm just going to put it over there. And notice it transferred my lot number over to here. It transferred the acreage, the stated area over here. This is using the other calculation in here. So attribute transfer is a really interesting tool because it allows me to go and select here and say, I want to go from here to here. And it'll go and automatically transfer those attributes that I've set up on here. That's the field mapping first, and then you do transfer attribution. The other thing is a sequential numbering. I love this one. Let me go through the steps. This is similar to the old ArcMap snake pin tool, in which it allows you to draw a line through elements in here. And it's for sequencing numbers and those sorts of things. You do a couple things. First, you set the feature class or the layer that it's going to be on. Then you tell it the field name that you're going to populate, and then the format. And this is really interesting, and I'll play around and show you some of the things you can do with this. Set the starting number, which is here, and then set the increment, which is here, and then click on this and actually start doing it. So how does this work? I'm going to go and turn my lots off, and I'm going to automatically go and take these. And let's say, for purposes, that what I wanted to do is I wanted to go and do sequential numbering on here. All right. And I want to go and number my parcel polygons. And I wanted to automatically number these. And let's start with simple. All right. And here's my format. By the way, format, this is the way you can tell it, the format of it, the numbers, whether or not you pad zeros or not pad zeros. This, you can actually see it in this help pop-up here. There's if you pad it or not. Let's just start with 1 and increment by 1. All right, real simple. So I can go in here and I can say, let's do here to here to here to here. All right, and I double click to finish it, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Automatically does that. Well, that's interesting. Well, I could even go and tell it, okay, let's increment it by 100, and let's start at 1 again, and let's start, and this is go from here to here to here to here. All right, and you can see it's incrementing in here, and I'm sequencing by here, and I started on that. So that's an interesting thing, but it's still not giving me what I want. In this case, let's go and use some of this other elements in here. For example, this is a information about, so let's use 04220 dash, and then I want this to be formatted as 3 numbers. So I'm going to put 3 pound signs in here, and I want to start at 1, and I want to increment it by 1 on here. So with this, I can go and click here to here to here to here, and let it automatically go and do numbering for me. Again, the secret to the sequence numbering is learning how to do this. If you have, for example, numbers, lot numbers, or anything that are the odds are on one side, the evens on the other side, you go ahead and do that. The question I have on here is what happens if that number is greater than 1,000? You can actually pad it that way. You can also go and pad it as far as how many places you want that to be and whether or not it's going to pad it. That's the padding element in here. It says, okay, here's the spaces you want to fill in, and you tell me how to go and fill it. It's actually very useful. The other thing is that, well, what happens if I want to skip something? So in this case, let's start this again. Let's start at 1, and let's go here And let's use the same here. And let's go here to here. I could tell it to do it to there, but I don't want to do that one. I want to go and skip it, and I can then go and start here to here and go through here and do it that way. So I can skip something completely just by stopping it, double clicking to stop it, and then starting it on one after I've gone and skipped it. All right. We covered a lot really quickly in here. So the question is, do we have any questions? Again, I don't see anything else inside of the chat window. So let's go ahead and stop this and stick around. We'll answer more questions afterwards. If you're not here live, please go and sign up at the bottom of our landing page on our website. And if not, I hope you enjoyed the workshop and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye.